and welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti, and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I'm really looking forward to another individual study with you today, focused on the founder of what would become the Chicago outfit, Jim Colosimo. Colosimo was truly the OG, and he had the personality and lifestyle that you would expect from such an influential figure. We have much to discuss today, so let's get right to it. Vincenzo Colosimo, who anglicized his name to James upon moving to the United States, was born on February 16, 1878, although some sources contend that he was born in late 1877. Once more, as there seems to be a consensus on the 1878 date, that's the story we're sticking with here in Racket Reviews. He was born in Colosimio, Italy, in the Calabria region, and was the second son to Luigi and his wife Giuseppina Mascaro Colosimo. The Colosimos were a powerful family in Colosimio. Colosimo's grandfather, Antonio Colosimo, was a wealthy landowner, and the family was very influential. Giuseppina was Luigi's second wife. His first wife, Santa, had died young, soon after giving birth to Luigi's first son, Antonio, named after his grandfather. With Giuseppina, Luigi would also have two daughters, Maria and Elisabetta. All of the children would attend school, but Vincenzo never learned how to read and write. Only Elisabetta and her older brother Francesco ever caught on. When Giuseppina died, Luigi married a woman named Ursula, with whom he had no children, and then she died. Luigi Colosimo was somewhat of a black widow, it seems. The family moved to the town of Petella Policasto, 25 miles away from Colosimio, where Elisabetta met her husband Franco Giraldo, who moved to the United States in 1898 and settled in Chicago. Elisabetta followed him to Chicago in 1899. Once there, Giraldo would put them in financial ruin and leave a bad mark on the name Colosimo. Of course, Giraldo's mark on the family would be but a scratch by the time his brother-in-law had finished his time in Chicago, but we'll get to that soon. As the Italian economy worsened, Luigi made the decision to send his 13-year-old son Vincenzo to the United States to make money for the family and make something of himself. Because he was so young, the 21-year-old Antonio accompanied his little half-brother to the United States on the SS Alsatia, arriving in New York Harbor on June 3, 1891. He would then accompany Vincenzo by train to Chicago and help him settle into the Italian neighborhood before bidding him farewell, returning to the old country, marrying an Italian girl, and never returning to the United States again. He had no interest in leaving his home country. The young Vincenzo would assimilate into his new environment and change his name to Jim, or James. While living there, Colosimo noticed something of an odd pattern in the new city. Nearly all of the illegal vices in red light districts were confined to a 16-block area of the city known as the Levee, or Levee District. Early on, Colosimo made ends meet by pickpocketing and shaking down local merchants with a small street crew. He would go on to have legitimate work as a paperboy. He would then be a shoe shiner, gum and shoestring salesman, water boy for the railway workers, and then eventually becoming a railway worker himself by the age of 15. He worked hard hammering spikes and became known as one of the toughest men on the team who had one of the toughest jobs. Colosimo would spend many nights in this red light district with these rough railway workers, catching on to how this peculiar vice district was able to operate freely in the concentrated area of the city. At the time, it was sort of an unspoken belief by many Chicagoans that it was better to have all of the vices in one place rather than sprinkled all throughout the city. In fact, Mayor Carter Henry Harrison firmly believed that if the levee were to be busted up by law enforcement, that the vice would completely infest the city. During this time, the aldermen of the First Ward, which is where the levee was located, had the power to appoint, tenure, and transfer police officers. If any officer were ever to contradict a First Ward alderman, they would find themselves transferred to an unfavorable station. The officers made more than their annual salary turning a blind eye to the vice district, then controlled by the infamous crooked aldermen Mike Kenna and John Coughlin. Each ward had two aldermen, and Coughlin was first elected to his alderman seat in a rigged election in 1893 thanks to his friend and then current alderman Mike McDonald, who thought Coughlin was helpful and passionate but easy to manipulate. McDonald was very wrong about the latter. Coughlin befriended a saloon and cigar store owner by the name of Mike Kenna, who would express a desire to beat out McDonald for his seat. By the way, during this time around the 1890s, Colosimo was actually working as a shoe shiner for one of Kenna's saloons. Tempted by the idea of ruling the Levee District and shaking down businesses to make a fortune, something about which McDonald lacked vision, Coughlin agreed to help Kenna. Kenna lost his first go at it but won in 1897, booting McDonald out of his spot and becoming Coughlin's partner in crime. The two would shake down brothels and gambling establishments, rig elections, and host annual balls which were essentially orgies. All of the criminals who wished to operate on the levee had to come through Kenna and Coughlin, and any rich, high-rolling individuals who wished to participate in vice but keep their nose clean also had to pay out to the aldermen. Kenna and Coughlin would run the levee this way for nearly 2 decades and made sure that Mayor Harrison was continuously re-elected. We'll come back to Kenna and Coughlin in just a moment, but right now let's focus back on Colosimo. By age 18, Colosimo had become a pimp after purchasing several women with the money he had earned or stolen. Unfortunately, he was not able to maintain this business because the law enforcement saw a young Italian immigrant pimp as an easy target and good PR plug. His operation as a pimp dispersed, and he found work as a street sweeper. Colosimo didn't stop there though. He was very ambitious and organized the street sweepers into social and athletic clubs and later organized them into a union. At this point, Kenna and Coughlin took note of Colosimo. Unions were a great way, along with paying registrants 50 cents per vote and giving homeless people a place to stay in exchange for fake votes, to rig elections. Colosimo was delivering votes from pimps, prostitutes, and street sweepers, and in exchange for that favor, Kenna and Coughlin put him into the position of precinct captain, a position which gave him immunity from arrest. With this promotion, he was able to re-up his prostitution ring, work as Kenna and Coughlin's collector, and gain access to the police and political corruption that would allow for him to build the empire that would become the Chicago outfit. The corruption got even better for Colosimo when the Levee's makeup moved from Irish to Italian. Colosimo, due to this ethnic shift, would be more politically powerful than the men who hired him. Kenna and Coughlin were left as aldermen, but now Colosimo was pulling the strings of the political machine, the police, the shakedowns, and the Levee district as a whole. Colosimo would marry Victoria Moresco in 1902. Moresco was one of the brothel madames, and Colosimo even named one of his bordellos after her, the Victoria. Moresco was more than just a life partner. She was his partner in crime, taking an active role in the day-to-day operations and further planning of the criminal empire Colosimo had created. It seems evident that especially early on, she ran the books and dealt with many of the upper-class clients. Remember, at this time, Colosimo was not yet literate. He would go on to own gambling establishments, over 100 bordellos, up to 200 at the peak of his career, and several opium dens. He would also be the head pimp of the Levee, in addition to his problems with the Moral Squad, a team in the Chicago police force that purposefully targeted the Levee district eventually on a nightly basis. In 1909, Colosimo began having trouble with the Black Hand extortion group, trying to take over his higher class operations. With the Levee, Colosimo was making over $50,000 per month, and with that, he began indulging his interests. He would come to be known as Diamond Jim, due to his love of wearing and buying diamonds and expensive clothing for himself. He always wore custom suits, diamond rings, and other flashy attire. He wore diamonds on every finger, a diamond horseshoe on his vest, diamond studs in his shirt, and diamonds on his suspender and belt buckles. The diamonds he did not wear, he carried loosely in his pockets like pennies to hand out to corrupt officers or public officials. It actually wasn't difficult for Colosimo to come by these diamonds, as he was a fence for many jewelry thieves. According to the Chicago Tribune, his diamond-studded garters were valued at $60, and his suspenders with diamond buckles at $200. When added together and translated to today's money, that's about $3,300 in just accessories. He opened Colosimo's Cafe, which was a world-class restaurant visited by politicians, celebrities, and opera singers, and your everyday folks and low-life criminals alike. According to the Chicago Tribune, you saw thieves and gamblers and crooked coppers and lords and dukes of the Badlands, but you could see, too, millionaires and merchants and bankers and novelists and teachers of kindergarten. The cafe was known for its mahogany and glass bar and dining room, in which patrons could sit beneath chandeliers made of pure gold and be surrounded by walls covered with green velvet and gold filigree. By the way, speaking of opera singers in the upper class, Colosimo was actually an enormous fan of classical music and Italian operas. With his wife, Victoria Moresco, Colosimo would listen to classical music and operas nightly. She would read him classic literature and teach him how to read and write. His literacy further fed his desire to reach further heights and earn bigger payouts. But his love for music had actually existed before his love for Moresco. During his time as a young urchin trying to make ends meet when he first moved to Chicago, he had been semi-adopted into a family that made sure that he was fed and clothed, the DiStefano family. And while Colosimo had grown close with that family, he did stray away into a life of crime, but had he stuck with them and their teachings, he could have lived a life on the straight and narrow. Colosimo lost touch when he pursued this criminal lifestyle. However, he still held much love for the DiStefanos and vice versa. Later, Colosimo would hire Rocco DiStefano as his personal attorney, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. While with the family, they often listened to opera and classical music. Colosimo learned to love this type of music during his time with them, and he also learned the value of being honest, which might seem a little contradictory given his line of work, but let me explain. The DiStefano family always paid back the debts that they owed and kept their promises, while Rocco DiStefano, the child with whom Colosimo had grown close during his time with the family, was served well in his legal pursuits. This same trustworthiness served Colosimo in his criminal career. Colosimo Colosimo had an underworld reputation for keeping his word and paying back his debts. When the Black Hand extortion group began shaking down Colosimo's cafe and several of the Levee bordellos, Moresco is said to have been the person who suggested that he bring Johnny Torrio, her cousin, from New York to help with the protection against the Black Hand extortionists. It has also been suggested that Torrio could have been related to Colosimo through his stepfather, but there's no concrete evidence there. For more information on that, you can check out the Johnny Torrio video that we covered last week. Colosimo eventually agreed and found that Torrio was an excellent addition to his crew. Torrio was cunning, intelligent, ambitious, and most importantly at the time, ruthless. It has been reported that Torrio had several Black Hand extortionists slaughtered on Colosimo's orders. In fact, it has been reported that they did such a good job of rooting these guys out that Colosimo never paid a penny to a Black Hand extortionist. It did not take long for Torrio to make a name for himself with Colosimo. He would be the mind responsible for purchasing virgins from the sex trade to fill Colosimo's bordellos, which made his establishments even more money. While all of this was going very well and Colosimo's crew was making more money than they knew what to do with, there was still the issue of the Moral Squad run by William C. Dannenberg. The Moral Squad was raiding the levee nightly and making it difficult for everyone to do business. Colosimo tasked Torrio with taking care of this in July of 1914. Torrio called his friend Rocco Vanilla to help, but in a botched attempt to kill Moral Squad leader William C. Dannenberg, Vanilla and several officers wound up injured, and Detective Sergeant Stanley J. Burns died from an injury sustained by friendly fire. On July 20th, 1914, Jim Colosimo's arrest was ordered by State's Attorney Maclay Hoyne for the shooting. Colosimo was enjoying lunch at his cafe when officers stormed in. They asked him several questions about the murder, to which Colosimo responded, "Lay off, fellas." In response, the detectives arrested Colosimo in front of his staff and patrons in an effort to humiliate him. He was fingerprinted and questioned at the station, but according to Hoyne, Colosimo wouldn't talk much, and what he did say wasn't true. The public was thrilled by this narrative, and the newspapers, including those run by William Randolph Hearst, were eager to get the most thrilling headlines out there. The American promised an inside scoop from an unnamed public official who knew about Colosimo's operations and gave insight into the roles of Johnny Torrio, Jakey Adler, and the Marshall brothers, who all served as underbosses or captains in Colosimo's crew and made up the Big Four. In response, the Daily News broke the story that Torrio was Colosimo's right-hand man. And of course, Hearst made sure that his paper, the Tribune, reported that a police officer who was privy to Colosimo's corruption, Officer 666, gave a full breakdown of how Colosimo had come into power and how he ran the levee. The anonymous officer reported, rules were laid down that each resort would pay a tax of from $10 to $200 a week, depending upon the nature and the amount of business of the establishment. Colosimo split the money 3 ways between the police, the political bosses, and the Big Four, plus Colosimo. Despite the media storm, the charges levied against Colosimo, Torrio, and Vanilla never actually went to trial. Colosimo and Torrio were very different from one another, in more than just appearance. Torrio remained quiet and didn't flaunt his wealth and power. Meanwhile, Colosimo carried loose diamonds in his pockets. Torrio was also wise in not sleeping with the prostitutes he controlled, while Colosimo, who has often been described as a big, lovable, fun-time guy, demonstrated no such prudence. It has also been noted that Torrio was not prone to drink, swear, or smoke, while Colosimo, who had his first real job as a railway worker, frequently engaged in all 3 vices. Torrio was a saver, Colosimo was a spender. The differences actually worked in balance with one another until about 1919. In that year, Torrio was interested in putting systems in place to prepare for the enormous money-making operation that would become Prohibition. In 1919, the 18th Amendment was signed to go into effect the next year. Torrio knew that the money to be made from illegal booze would be beyond anything brothels or gambling dens could earn. It was also in this year that Torrio called the young Al Capone from New York to be his bouncer and driver. Before Prohibition, Colosimo had invested $25,000 into a brewery operated by one of his saloon owners, Jake Guzik. Torrio was certain that his boss would go along with the scheme that so many other criminals had begun working in, such as the Irish mobster Dino Banyan. Since Colosimo had already invested so much into the brewery, Torrio was under the impression that he would be on board with bootlegging, and while Colosimo did approve of Torrio's operation to illegally sell beer to secret merchants and bars, Torrio wanted much more. When approached about the idea of expanding this operation into liquor, speakeasies, bootlegging, and rum running, Colosimo shut it down. He wanted to maintain the empire he had with brothels and gambling dens. He wanted to keep the control of the levee, and he didn't want to go against the federal law. In Torrio's mind, that was a green light to arrange his murder. But rewind, there was also something else going on in Colosimo's life at the turn of the decade. Colosimo had met the former Methodist church choir singer Dale Beulah Winter in Grand Rapids while she was working with a band leader. However, when she entered Colosimo's cafe to try out as a solo singer and entertainer, Colosimo was struck with Cupid's arrow and fell immediately in love with her. Colosimo granted her star billing and even had her attend operatic voice lessons from Chicago opera vocal trainer Giacomo Spadoni. The two began a courtship, and during this time she had urged Colosimo to speak more softly, tone down the garish clothing and diamonds, and be more polite. Soon the couple had fallen deeply in love, and Colosimo secured an uncontested divorce from Moresco in March of 1920. He then married Dale Winter in April of 1920, before taking off on a 2-week honeymoon with her to West Baden, Indiana, where they enjoyed a relaxing and romantic spa setting and the health benefits of the area's mineral water known as Pluto water. Okay, so the health benefits of this water is that it was a laxative, and you're actually not supposed to drink it. In fact, you're not allowed to drink it in West Baden anymore. But if you take a bath in this mineral water, it does wonders for your skin. When they returned from their honeymoon, they were supposed to have attended an exclusive dinner party together, but Colosimo received a call, allegedly from Johnny Torrio himself, requesting an important meeting at Colosimo's cafe immediately. Colosimo telephoned his wife to let her know that he'd be late for dinner, saying, "Angel, just got a call? Gotta meet a guy at the restaurant, it's important." At 4:30 p.m. on May 11th, 1920, Colosimo arrived at the cafe and asked one of the restaurant workers, Joe Gabriella or Gabriella depending on the source, if anyone was there to see him, and Gabriella said no. He then went back to his office. Someone entered the cafe later and asked if Colosimo was in his office, and Gabriella told him that he was. Later, Gabriella heard a gunshot and then found out that Colosimo had been killed. According to what Gabriella told police, this man looked very similar to Frankie Yale, Johnny Torrio's New York partner and usual assassin of choice, but when Gabriella had the opportunity to identify Yale in a lineup, he refused. A completely different version of this story is also reported in the Chicago Tribune. In this version, Colosimo entered through the rear door of his office and said to his secretary Frank Camilla, "Hello Frank, what's doing?" And Camilla replied, "Nothing." When Colosimo went up to the front of the cafe, a figure emerged from the shadows and fired 2 bullets, one that stuck in the glass pane and the other that went into Colosimo's head, killing him. Frankie Yale, coming to do this at Torrio's request, seems like the most likely culprit and motive. Other motives for the murder include Colosimo's ex-wife, who was apparently displeased with how she was cut from the will, but that seems unlikely since Colosimo had no will. In fact, dividing his assets was a murky process to be undertaken by his personal attorney, Rocco Di Stefano. Colosimo had no children, natural or adopted. Di Stefano was made administrator of Colosimo's estate after saying that Colosimo would have wanted a scholarship made for poor boys and a bequeathment to go to the Knights of Pythias Orphans Home. After this, the discussion of the scholarship and donation to the orphanage were never mentioned again, making many inclined to believe that Di Stefano took some for himself. What they were able to gather from his estate and bank accounts and lockboxes and businesses was actually significantly less than they had expected given Big Jim's lifestyle. Victoria Moresco had the following to say to reporters about her deceased ex-husband. "Jim is dead and I won't besmirch his name. Until he met Dale Winter, he was good to me, and I won't say ill of the dead because of the times he was good to me. For 20 years I was Jim Colosimo's confidant and at times his advisor. If they who are fighting me want to test it, I am ready for a fight to the finish. I am an Italian, Jim was an Italian. I am not afraid." An interesting thing to say, but I have it on pretty good authority that Moresco was an interesting woman. From her quote, it would seem that she was still in some businesses that they had run together, and that others thought it would be up for grabs since Colosimo was gone. It would seem that they had another thing coming. Dale Winter had said, "All I want of Jim is the memory of him. I don't want the money or the things he gave me." And it would seem that she meant what she said. With the exception of her wedding ring and engagement ring, Winter renounced her rights to any titles, interests, benefits, estate, jewelry, merchandise, all of it. She even abjured her widow rights. When the judge asked why she was giving up her widow rights, her response was so that there remained no grounds for the belief on the part of anybody that she had married Big Jim for his money. Johnny Torrio arranged Colosimo's funeral. The elaborate funeral included about 5,000 spectators who followed the hearse for miles. Colosimo's body had been placed into a casket that fit the personality of Diamond Jim. It was made of silver and mahogany with the total cost of $7,500. According to the Chicago Tribune, 3 judges, 8 aldermen, an assistant state's attorney, a congressman, a state representative, and a leading artist of the Chicago Opera Company are listed as honorary pallbearers, along with the gamblers, ex-gamblers, dive-keepers, and ex-dive-keepers. Vincenzo James Colosimo was laid to rest in Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews discussing the life of Southside and Chicago Outfit founder Jim Colosimo. Colosimo had certainly several mysteries that surrounded his life, and even more that surrounded his death. But I think given the information that we do have about him, we can get a real sense of what the man was actually like. Make sure to let me know in the comment section below or on Facebook and Twitter what you think about Jim Colosimo and the fascinating characters that surrounded his inner circle. We certainly have a lot to talk about. Also, don't forget to utilize the comment section and social media to let me know who you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your sub box. Ciao!